We are in the book of Hebrews, and what we're doing is pulling the Old Testament and New Testament together. The book of Hebrews is, as we have been going through it, one massive either quote or paraphrase from the Old Testament. We believe that the author is Paul, although that is not 100% certain. Where we are at right now is in the main text of the book. Between chapter 6 and chapter 10, although this says week 9, I should have taken that off. It's not week 9 for us, it's week 7. But this is the main, the girth of the book. This is the most important part. Although there's some great information, this is what Paul is trying to get across to these Jews who are struggling under persecution and on the threatening of going back into Judaism from Christianity. And so this is where we're at. He has given several arguments. There's different ways of setting up those arguments, and we've gone through several different ones, but this is one more. I believe this one's from Gary Hamrick, but you can understand what he's saying through his arguments. He's taught in chapter 1 through chapter 8, he's talking about the superiority of Christ. And he talks about Jesus being greater than the angels, greater than Moses, greater than Aaron, greater than the priests, greater than the high priest, greater than Melchizedek. And that's where we're at right now. He speaks of him better than the prophets as a better spokesman. He speaks of him better as angels by the virtue of his deity and humanity. Better than Moses, for he's the son who provides a better heavenly rest. And better than Aaron and his priesthood in a superior one. And we've been through those, but that's just kind of background to where we are at now. So let's pick up where we left off right after the fourth warning in the book of Hebrews with his encouragement. Hebrews chapter 6, we're going to start with verse 9. But beloved, we are confident of better things concerning you. Yes, things that accompany salvation, though we speak in this manner. For God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown towards his name, in that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. By the way, this is a hint that some of those that he's writing to are actually priests, Jewish priests that had converted to Christianity, because he's talking about their ministry. Verse 11. And we desire that each of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until, until the end, that you do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. Verse 13, and now we're going to start off fresh because we talked about that last week. For when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you. And so, after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise. For men indeed swear by the greater, and an oath of confirmation is for them an end of all dispute. When you and I make a promise, we might say we pinky swear if you're, of the three older ones here in the room. You younger ones, I have no idea what you guys swear by. Oh, you did a pinky swear? All right. So that's spanned several generations. Usually when you make a promise, though, you promise by something greater than you. When we were kids, cross my heart, and I hope to die, stick a needle in my... You don't want any of those things to take place. So you're going to keep your promise, right? This is what Paul is talking about here. God is giving a promise to Abraham. But if God said, well, I swear by the trees, I swear by the sun, by the moon, by the stars, that it'll come up in the morning. Anything that you can think of, if God swore by it, made a promise by it, it wouldn't have been good enough because he created it all. So when he goes to give a promise to Abraham, he says, I promise by my name that I will do this because his name is the greatest. And that's what he's speaking to here. He's speaking to that surety. Now think about this. It's one thing if I tell you I'm going to do something. Problem is, there's all kinds of things that can get in the way of it. I can even promise you by something great, but life gets in the way, right? It turns out I'm usually 5 minutes late or something like that. You know, you get a flat tire, all kinds of things. But when God tells you he's going to do something, he's going to do it. He speaks the word and it happens because his words are truth. But think about this. God didn't just tell Abraham that he was going to do this. He promised by his very name. Surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you. And he gives the swearing by his own name. Boy, folks, that ain't changing. That is it. It's going to happen. And we know that it did. I want to take us back to Genesis when this happened. Genesis chapter 15 is when God gives this promise to Abram or Abraham. And I'm just, by the way, going back forth through his life, I'm just going to call him Abraham instead of Abram, even though the time period is probably Abram. I think you understand what I mean. So when he's 75, Abraham leaves Haran, and Isaac isn't born until he's 100. So we got a 25-year span here of God's blessing. Genesis chapter 15, verse 7. Then he said to him, God said to Abraham, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans, to give you this land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, how shall I know that I will inherit it? So he said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Then he brought it all out to him, and he cut them into 2 pieces, down the middle, and he placed each piece opposite of each other, but he did not cut the birds in 2. Now, for us, this seems really weird. This is not how we do a contract today, okay? This is not how we make promises. But back then, this is what they did. They would have an offering, okay? And they would share in this offering. They would eat it as a meal because this is communion, all right? They would bring these offerings, and God told Abraham what to bring. And Abraham cut them in half down the middle. And he put them facing each other on either side. And he put them in a row, okay? What will happen is the parties making the covenant or the contract would do a figure 8 and walk around those pieces, in amongst those pieces. And the reason was essentially, if I don't keep my promise, so help me be one of these, so help me die. It was, I am making this with my own blood. I mean, this is as close to I can get as saying I will die if I don't do this. Okay? So this is what's actually taking place. And so let's continue. Verse 11. If I can get there. Good grief. And when the vultures came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. Now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. Really quickly, notice it says vultures there. We would expect if you lay out animals cut in half, animals are going to show up, especially at night, right? Anytime you see birds in the Bible, pay attention because they're dangerous. They're not good. Birds are not a good thing. We like birds. I mean, we like to feed birds. Some people, I don't. I don't want to waste my money. I figure if God has created this wonderful, beautiful world, I can watch them eating way over there. I don't have to pay for food for them to look at my window. But the idea is birds are evil. If you go to the kingdom parables, you remember the parable of the soils? The good soil, the bad soil, you know, the word that fell on the cart path, what happened to the birds came and took it away. Nebuchadnezzar, when he becomes the great tree of a nation, The prophecy says that inside that great tree, the birds of the world will be able to find their nest. And what that's referring to is demons. And we find it over and over again. And here, these vultures, these birds, are coming to destroy the covenant that God is making with Abraham. It's pretty impressive. It's the singularity of the Bible, I guess. I don't know how better to say it. But it's common. It keeps a common word. All right, verse 13. So Abram falls asleep. He has this really dark, horrible dream. An oppressive darkness comes on him. And then he said to Abram, God says to Abram, now certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them for 400 years. And also a nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. Now think about this. Abraham is saying, okay, God, if you're giving me this land, how do I know that I'm actually going to possess it? So God says, well, let's have a meal. Let's have a covenant. I'll make a promise with you. So Moses goes and the vultures try to break this up. Now he starts to have a dream, and he has this terrible, horrible dream of just horror and dread. It's awful. It's scary. And then God says, guess what? Your children are going to leave where you're at now, and they're going to go into a foreign land, and they're going to be subject to these people for 400 years. Thanks a lot, God. We're talking about them inheriting, and you're talking about them leaving and going to be in slavery somewhere else. But notice, he says they will be there for 400 years. God's very specific. Not only will they be there for 400 years, the nation that they are serving, he will judge, and then they will go out with great possession. And we remember in the story of the Exodus, after the firstborn were killed, the people were giving them stuff just to get them out of their hair. They were giving them gold and jewelry and flocks and herds. Just get out of here. God's promise became true. Hebrews chapter 11, that we will come into later, tells us that Abraham died in faith, not having received the promise. But the promise did come. And it was to all of his family, all of his generations. Verse 15 of Genesis chapter 15. Now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. But in the fourth generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. And it came to pass, when the sun went down and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces. On that same night the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. Few things. Why couldn't the children of Israel just take the land? Why couldn't Abraham's children just take the land then? God tells him here. The iniquity, the sin of the Amorites was not complete. God was still giving the Amorites, Gentile, evil pagans, he was giving them mercy, giving them a chance to repent. He knew they wouldn't, but he was giving them the opportunity. That's pretty amazing. After that, I want you to notice, I told you the practice. They would cut the animals in half, lay it on either side, and the parties making the covenant would make the figure eight through the animals that were split. Who's doing the walking? It's literally just the oven and the burning torch. Abraham doesn't move. Abraham isn't subject to this covenant. It's not as if, Abraham, if you do this many things, if you keep to this covenant, then I will do this. I will keep my end of it. No, this is all God. God is the one making the judgment. When he gave them this promise was irrevocable. It was not dependent on anything. This was God saying, I am giving you this land, period. This is really important, particularly for the war that's taking place in the Middle East right now. God gave them this land. It was not contingent on if they followed him. Nowhere in here does it say, Abraham, you have to be faithful. Your children have to be faithful. It does not say it once. This is God's promise to them that he is going to do this. Also, notice where it's at. To your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt. What is that? The Nile. To the great river, the Jordan? Euphrates. That is a lot bigger area than what Israel currently possesses. This is their land. Whether they take it or it's given to them, it's their land. There's a teaching out there. It's called replacement theology. And it is from the pits of hell. Okay? It says that God's promise was only good to Israel as long as they were faithful. Once they stopped being faithful, once they killed the Messiah, the promises weren't theirs anymore. It is false. If that's the truth, guess what that means? Our salvation spent by Jesus' blood is nil. It means that it doesn't matter anymore. Because if God couldn't keep his promise to the children of Israel, he sure can't keep it to us either. The church is not Israel. Israel is a separate entity. We are the church. We're the body of Christ. We are the bride of Christ. And that is totally different. We have different agendas. We have different rewards. We have different places in prophecy and history. Do not believe the lie that says the church is Israel. We are not. It's because of that teaching that the Lutheran churches in Germany were silent when Hitler was executing Jews. So, I think I said that strong enough. If not, I'll probably do a teaching on it at some point. But this is their land given to them, and it doesn't matter. There's no provisos for them. This is just God saying, this is what I'm going to do. And I promise by my own name that it's going to happen. By the way, that hasn't happened yet. Guess what? It's going to. Because he promised by his name. All right. Let's go back to Hebrews. That was the promise that he was referring to. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 17. Thus, God determining to show more abundantly to the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath, that by two immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have strong consolation, who have fled for refuge to lay hold of the hope set before us. Now, who all really enjoyed that? You got a lot out of that, right? Oh my goodness. That's wordy. That's hard to understand. The problem with going verse by verse, like we talked about last week, is, boy, you get into some picker brushes, if you want to call it that. It gets some difficult spots. Immutability, what it means is God doesn't change. Okay? So God, wanting to show abundantly to the heirs of promise his unchangeableness, promised by an oath of his own name, so that these two things that won't change, in which it's impossible for God to lie, we can have a strong faith, a strong consolation. We can trust what God says. God doesn't change. He doesn't lie. Since those two things are true, we can have a hope that God's going to keep his promise. That's great for the Jews because that means they still get land, that this is their land. But more importantly than that, for us who have run to him in refuge of our sin, forgiveness, running to refuge from the day of judgment, the day of his wrath, if he promises in his word that anyone that confesses their sin, he is faithful and just to forgive them of their sin and to cleanse them from all unrighteousness. If we've run to him and he doesn't lie and he keeps his word, we can know in faith that he's going to receive us, that he's going to do what he said. That's paraphrased, but hell, I think it helps us understand a little bit. Also, he says, talking about this, having fled for refuge. And this again, he's going back to an Old Testament passage that they would understand. When they split up the land, the tribe of the Levites, who were the priests, did not receive an allotment of land. They received cities in which they owned and lived in. There were 6 of them. There was 3 on the east side of the country, and there was 3 on the west side of the country. And these were called refuge cities. Cities of refuge. Let's go to it, and we'll talk about those. Numbers chapter 35 is where we find it. And just for lack of time, we're only going to take a few verses out of it, just so you can see them. Chapter 35, verse 15. These 6 cities shall be for refuge for children of Israel, for the stranger and for the sojourner among them, that anyone who kills a person accidentally may flee there. Skipping down to verse 25. So the congregation shall deliver the manslayer from the hand of the avenger of blood, and the congregation shall return him to the city of refuge where he had fled. And he shall remain there until the death of the high priest who was anointed with holy oil. What these cities were, I want to make sure I'm not, okay. Yeah. What these cities were, if you, by some accident, killed somebody, it was not murder, it just happened. You were working, somehow the person got injured and died. It's not murder. You have to go before a court case. They don't have prison like what we have today, where if you do something wrong, they can throw you into prison. Immediately after you doing this, you would run to one of these cities of refuge. It was the responsibility of the family who lost their loved one to take your life in his place or her place. Okay? So if you accidentally killed somebody, it was the family's responsibility to avenge the blood of the one they lost by taking your life. God set up these 6 cities so that if you did that, you would run to this city. When you get inside the city, you would go before the court. The court would have a court case. If you were found not guilty, if it was by accident, it was not intentional, it was not murder, you were allowed to live in that city without having fear that that family would come after you. If you were found guilty, you were killed on the spot. So if you were guilty, you didn't go to the cities of refuge. You ran for your life somewhere else. If you weren't guilty, you ran to these places. And what you would do is you would live inside that city, safe, being protected by the priests and the guard, until the high priest died. When the high priest died, you were free to go home. And if they took your life then, it was murder on their heads. Does that make sense? Let's go down to verse 26. But if the manslayer at any time goes outside the limits of the city of refuge where he fled, then and the avenger of blood finds him outside the city limits of the city of refuge, the avenger of blood kills the manslayer, he shall not be guilty of blood, because he should have remained in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer may return to the land of his possession. Excuse me. My voice is this evening. So, Paul mentions Jesus is our place of refuge. And he refers them back to this. All of us have blood on our hands. Our sin is what put Jesus on the cross. It was not the religious leaders that nailed Jesus to the cross. It was our sin. They didn't take his life. He gave it up, like we've been talking about in Luke. Also, it wasn't the Romans that killed Jesus. No, it was our blood. All of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We've all done things we knew were wrong. Because of that, Jesus had to die. But what's interesting is he's also our place of refuge. Because he was our sin payment, we come to him and ask forgiveness. And he forgives us. He is the place where we would run to, this place of refuge where the judgment of God is not on us. But what's also interesting is, not only is he the refuge, he's also the avenger of blood. We like to think of God as our refuge, as Jesus as our refuge. We don't like to think of him as the avenger of blood. But one of these days, if we have not found him as our refuge, he will avenge the blood that was spilled. And it will be your blood that will be spilled. Isn't it interesting? Notice when the man goes free. Go back to the next one, Daniel. Previous one, I'm sorry. And he shall remain there until the death of the high priest who is anointed with the holy oil. Think about this picture. Jesus is our place of refuge. He is also our high priest in the order of Melchizedek. That's what he's been fighting over. He's been trying to convince us of. We are in captivity, in refuge, until he died. But after the high priest died, we are free to go to our land of possession, that rest that he talked about in chapter 4. He's already died. So the minute we take our refuge in him, he's already dead, so we automatically are just, okay, you're free to go. What a beautiful picture. Do you see all of these things that Paul is pulling out, talking about Christ? He's our high priest. He's our city of refuge. He's our avenger of blood. He is our payment for sin. All of these things, it's all Paul is showing. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. This is Jesus. All right. Back to verse 19. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.